Hello, Renata Joy here, and welcome to Pathway to Wealth Building. Now, as you know, we're in the month of April, which is officially Financial Literacy Month. However, I feel that financial literacy is something that we should be doing each and every day. I'm talking 365 days out of the year. You see, I'm a big proponent of education because when you get educated, you're able to mitigate risk. You're able to fill your knowledge gaps. And tonight, we have a very special guest who's known for helping individuals fill their knowledge gaps when it comes to the economy and finances. Now, our special guest has been here before, and I want to personally invite you to go back and listen to that previous conversation. Now, before I introduce him, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to go grab some pen and paper and be prepared to take good, copious notes. Our special guest is known for dropping so many nuggets, and I want to make sure that you get the information. And also, if he says anything that resonates with you or steps on your toes, or if you have any questions, please feel free to leave it in the comments. So let me read his bio. His name is Dr. Michael G. Thomas. He's an accredited financial counselor and a lecturer at the University of Georgia. His research focuses on financial empathy and self-compassion, data visualizations, effects on financial behavior, and the connection between brain function and money. Dr. Thomas's philosophy on how to effectively interact with money can be summed up in his TED Talk, Financial Empathy. Understanding the story beneath the numbers, utilizing financial empathy as a process for active listening, and the creation of client-focused financial recommendations are reflected in two financial literacy and capability programs that he helped co-create, Money Dogs and Discovering Money Solutions. Dr. Thomas is also the founder of Modem Solutions, a virtual financial coaching service he has been providing since 2015. And he is also soon to be an author with his forthcoming book. It's called The Black Financial Culture, Building Wealth from the Inside Out. So join me in welcoming Dr. Thomas to the pathway of wealth building. Welcome.
Thanks for having me back. I really appreciate it. So it's definitely an honor, and I'm definitely humbled, I guess, to be here this evening speaking to your audience. So yeah.
No, thank you. The last time that you were here, you were giving us your insight of the current status of the economy. And you said that you would come back and give us an update. And boy, I'm sure so much has happened. I don't know if you predicted those things, but
Yeah.
so much things has occurred since that last conversation. Can you give us what's your updates now? Where are
Yeah,
we?
I would honestly, I think the most important thing that people need to be mindful of, especially as it relates to movement in the stock market. What's always good for Wall Street isn't always good for Main Street. And I think that sometimes this gets lost in translation because we're trying to use what's happening in the stock markets to be indicative of what's happening in the everyday lives of just, regular Joe, so to speak.
Mhm.
But the incentives of Wall Street, the incentives of corporations that are publicly traded, are rooted in their capacity to return value to their shareholders. So when you see the markets kind of pick up, and we've had a little bit of a relief rally based on the Fed kind of being as transparent as it can be about rate hikes. We did 25 basis points recently. The consensus is that we'll see another 25 basis points. And then after that, the Fed will let things kind of ride out a little bit. And a lot of that is transpiring because of the strain that the raising of the rates through the Federal Reserve is placing on the banking system. And I know that there have been a lot of talking heads around this. My frustration in these conversations is that it isn't that a bank has done anything wrong. In low interest rate environments, in which just about every bank was in, if we go back to 2000 and even before then, we've been in low interest rate environments. Generally speaking, if we have this thing called a normal bond yield curve,
Okay.
meaning that if you hold US bonds for longer periods, you're going to see higher rates. Uh, that you're going to receive on those bonds over the life or the maturity of those bonds. So it actually was pretty logical that banks had placed their money in these long-term holdings. It only became an issue when the Fed started to aggressively raise rates. Now, why is that an issue? It's an issue because if I'm going on the market and I want to buy a bond, I'm going to buy bonds with the highest yields. So if I have all of these low interest rate bonds, and now I need to sell them in a market where there are more competitive bonds, that means that now I have to lower the price of my bonds just to be able to match the yield on the other bonds in the market. So I have to devalue my holdings. And that's literally where banks were, quite honestly, meaning that they had all these assets on the books that didn't have the same value that they had had prior to the Fed running up the rates. And with Silicon Valley Bank more specifically, this bank, their clientele were venture capitalists. So the inflow and outflow of money was based on the flow of venture capital. So what ended up happening was that because the market started to slow down, especially in the tech sector, if anybody has been following anything as it relates to maybe job layoffs and things of that nature, that's where it's been happening. And that is what hit Silicon Valley. So venture capitalists, and these are these individuals who are accredited investors who can invest in really risky startups with the hope that maybe of the 10 that they invest in, maybe 2 of them make it, right? So it's already incredibly risky. But they had already started pulling back the reins on how much cash they were going to be giving to the companies that they were investing in. So what's happening in that ecosystem is that less money is coming in, but more money is needing to come out to keep those companies afloat. Now, couple that with having money tied up somewhere else, and you feel like you can't do anything with it. And there were actually some things that were actually already in play with Silicon Valley Bank to get the liquidity that they needed. But the state of California intervened pretty quickly. And some would say that if they could have gotten through to a Monday to have received the liquidity for some of the things that they were doing behind the scenes, that it would not have been as much of an issue. Right. But I think that this is a very important point. Silicon Valley Bank isn't the only bank that's had to deal with this issue. And there was a paper that actually came out that actually looked at a number of banks and found that roughly 120 are in a position where they're underwater on the bonds. The issue, though, is that they don't have the same inflow outflow concerns as that like Silicon Valley Bank did, right? Because of it was a very special bank that served a very special group of companies in Silicon Valley, right? So in terms of there being any need for concern in that regard, not necessarily. The Federal Reserve has already come in and said that they're going to serve as a backstop in terms of assuring deposits that are above 250,000, which in other words saying the vast majority of people that bank, that's not a vast majority of people problem. Right. That's a business problem. That's a business owner problem. That's the wealthiest of type problem. So the vast majority of people are not going to be affected. Now, what is happening though, is that the Federal Reserve is now having to start to print money again, right? Which we've kind of held off on that, but we are doing it. But the difference this time is that we're printing money, but the banks are putting up collateral to offset the printing that we're doing. So the printers are up and running. I think that there is some positive sentiment amongst companies and corporations and things of that nature as it relates to some of the decisions that our federal government has implemented and more or less, and the Fed being less hawkish, meaning that they're not going to be aggressively raising rates, hopefully after next month. Then we're going to see a fairly favorable environment for business, because the hope is that if we can ride this out a little bit, we don't see significant upticks in employment because the Fed is trying to cool the demand side of the economy. And you do that by causing for businesses to say that, hey, we're not going to employ as many people, companies aren't expanding, so on and so forth. Because if that happens, you have more people working, more money being made, more money circulating the economy, which is exacerbating the issue we've been navigating since the pandemic. So that's the goal there. So the hope is that we see that start to come down a little bit. We start to see inflation move downward without having to see additional significant federal intervention, because usually the way that this works is that there's a lagging effect, meaning that the Fed makes a decision. It takes about 2 or 3 months for us to actually be able to see the impact of that. But I think that, quite honestly, in terms of what we're seeing with the bank, that I think was a really, really good sign to understand that the pipes are kind of bulging a little bit, and we need to kind of taper it down, cool it down a little bit, provide some confidence to the US economy and the world abroad, because domestic companies weren't the only ones impacted by SVB. International companies were as well. So we need to understand that these systems, the United States system and the value of the dollar, both domestically and worldwide, is a very important thing. So that being said, hopefully, as we move forward, we actually see inflation start to come down without the Fed having to take aggressive rate hikes or come back to doing that again. And we start to see this curtailing of things. Unfortunately, though, what we also know, Renata, and I'll stop here, is that we're also seeing debt going up.
That's what I was just about to go into.
We're seeing debt going up. We're seeing consumer savings going down. So unfortunately, there's going to be a little pain that needs to be felt. And I know that everybody who's taking on debt isn't just taking on debt because they're out there, balling out like there's no tomorrow, whatever. Food prices have gone up, rent has gone up, all these, there are a lot of expenses. So my biggest thing would be, as we're navigating this in Financial Literacy Month, quite obviously, is for individuals to just take some time to breathe through it, quite honestly. And honestly, sometimes if you're in a position where you don't have enough cash flow to meet your needs, sometimes treading water is the optimal financial strategy. I'm just going to be very honest. So the goal here is that if I have to incur debt, let me engage in a process where I'm thinking, well, I know I'm going to have to incur some, but do I have to incur as much as I'm incurring? And let me kind of mitigate that. And if you can do that as you're navigating some of these difficult times, then what happens is that once we get to the backside of it, it doesn't take as much time to shore things up, to get on solid footing, and then to start running this race again if somebody's in that situation right now. So taking on debt isn't necessarily bad if that is the way that you're needing to survive. But being mindful and actually creating, you can budget how much, like, this is my cash flow, these are my needs, this is what I can cover, this is what I can't, and this is all that I'm going to take out. And not getting into this mind, because it can be a slippery slope, quite honestly. So just mitigating the debt situation, because interest rates are higher, credit, because of the federal rate hikes, the cost of borrowing is higher across the board. So that's going to have an impact on a lot of households. We're also seeing repossessions go up on vehicles and things of that nature as well. Like, there's all these little small indicators. The issue, though, is that we don't talk about those things until after we start getting the major news reports, right? So I think it's so incredibly important to understand that these things are happening. If you feel that unease of things, kind of you're losing grip of some things, even in your own personal financial affairs, right now is the best time to stop, to reach out to a financial counselor or coach or someone it may be, to help you emotionally and logically work through the situation. Because this is, in these situations, what happens is that people typically allow the very worst to happen financially before they consider seeking help. What I want to encourage, especially during Financial Literacy Month, is don't let things get as bad as they can possibly get before you reach out. Right? If you even feel like you're slipping a little bit, it would be of considerable value to work with someone to help you see your situation, potential resources and opportunities that you can't see, because you're emotionally roused by your financial circumstances, which oftentimes causes us to engage in avoidance and actually not have the capacity to see the clearest, right, when it comes to our own financial circumstances. And I think the best way to kind of put a bow on that, it's no different like if you're dating somebody and you have like you're going through the
According.
the phase in which it's just the puppy dog phase of love, right? And then you work through that, and because it's all emotionally aroused, then you have to deal with the reality of the situation, and now you're left thinking like, why in the world did I even consider this person, right? It's a real thing, because we have chemicals in our brain, endorphins, cortisol, oxytocin was the word I was trying to get at earlier, that all play a significant role in the way how we feel and how we engage and things of that nature. So it's very important to understand that those neurological chemicals, our emotions, are just as much a part of our financial wellness journey as doing the stated optimal financial thing. You have to be able to balance both, and working with a professional, I think, allows for people to be able to do that and to be able to neutralize their emotions, establish some confidence, and allow for people to make decisions and choices in a way to where they're just confident in moving forward. So I'll stop there.
No, I mean, you answered my questions as if you knew. It's important to, I love the fact that you painted a good picture of how to actually navigate during this time. And what I'm hearing is you need to have a solid plan. You
You
can
got to
get
have a
through.
plan.
You
And this
have
is
to
the
have.
thing, though. It's not just having a plan. It's also creating the space to create the plan. So
Mhm.
so this is where I differ a little bit with a lot of people who are financial experts, because they want to focus just on information.
Mhm.
Information alone is not enough in this space. We have to think about our systems. We have to think about our capacity to receive and engage with information and all these different things. And all of that has to work in such a way so that we can actually create some real momentum. So if we're going to create a plan, the goal then would be is to sit back and say, okay, most people, when they want to talk about money, they want to talk about it when they're fatigued. And decision fatigue is a real thing. It's usually at the end of the day, right?
Mhm.
On the weekends when you're trying to rest, and usually during moments where you actually don't emotionally and psychologically have the capacity to engage. So the trick here is, how do I engage in a process first before I create the plan, to create the space
Right. That's so
so I
important.
can engage in a way that works for me. If clutter messes with me, then I need to have a decluttered space. So before I even create the plan, I actually need to declutter. Right. So that is a barrier before we even get to the plan, because even if you were trying to do the plan and it was cluttered, you're not going to be able to focus and you're not going to get anything done. And we're
Exactly.
wondering why I'm still where I've been. So I
Mhm.
really want to encourage people to consider, what type of space do you need before you even begin the plan, right?
Mhm.
And this would be the last thing I'll say to that. What we also know is that just going on a brisk walk, what it does is that it causes for us to be less myopic, which means we're just focused tunnel vision on
Mhm.
things. And it actually expands the way that we see the world, right? So we're not laser focused on something. We expand. We're using our prefrontal cortex. It actually changes our eyes in the way that we're seeing things. And also, the walking actually causes for us to have pleasure hormones such as endorphins and things of that nature. So actually doing very not heavy exercise, like a very light, brief walk. And I'm not sure if anybody's ever felt this way, where you've gone on a walk and then you get back and you're like, man, I just have all these ideas. And you're
Mhm.
actually energized by it. So
Mhm.
I would argue, in terms of systems and routine, create the space, right? And then also maybe go on a brisk 15-minute walk before, and then a brisk 15-minute walk after, because what it also does is it causes for you to breathe,
Mhm.
right? And there's actually a lot of literature that talks about how breathing helps us deal with anxiety, It helps us to be more focused. It does a lot of good things for us. These are some anecdotal things that often we don't talk about that actually work wonders. And if you're in a relationship, oftentimes before you sit down and work on the numbers, go on a walk and talk together and just talk big picture about, hey, what are we trying to do? Where are we trying to go? Don't get into the details, because once we get into details, we often get stuck there.
Right.
It's very important to be able to step back and just realize that this isn't about the details. The details are just the guide to how we're going to get to where we're going. Where we're going is the most important thing. That's the thing that we're excited about. So like a walk and talk, maybe 15, 20 minutes before, during, after. And then lastly, if you're in a relationship, the last thing that I would encourage is that you do this at a table. Because what a table does, it creates distance, it creates space, and then sometimes it can create an adversarial dynamic, right? So if you're going to work together on your money and things of that nature, do it outside, right? Go get some coffee, right? Go do it outside of the normal spaces in which you would, because again, what you're utilizing is a tool, and that's so incredibly important. Your relationship is the main thing. The tool is just a way to facilitate our relationship goals. So the budget, the spending plan are not a prioritize. You don't prioritize that over your relationship. You create the space for your relationship to thrive within the context of working through this tool that we have shared common goals, and also space for our own individual goals. And we make concessions along the way. But I think it's so incredibly important, with a lot of the uncertainty and things of that nature, to actually get out, get a little bit of exercise, just a brisk walk, and make that a habit, because it does provide clarity of mind. It energizes us. We become more creative. We're using more of our prefrontal cortex, and it mitigates our emotional response, because we're actually engaging in a aerobic activity, and we're engaging in breathing, which all help self-regulate without having to learn any tool or any tactic. Those are things that naturally help us to self-regulate. So I would include those as well.
Let me ask you this. I think all of that was great. I hope you guys are taking great notes. As I said, it's going to give you some great nuggets. What would you say to whether it's a single parent or a two-parent home? How do they have this type of dialogue with their children, especially with the, what lessons should they be able to impart into their children right now to prepare them? Because this is going to happen again. This isn't the
first
time it happen. It's just a cycle that continuously does happen.
It does. So I think that this is the best time to actually, so this is a way that how I would frame it. We use this moment to educate our kids about the economy, about the Federal Reserve and what's their function, why are they raising rates, right? Because it's for the greater good of the economy and to get us back to a healthy economy sooner than later. It's no different that when you're not feeling good and you're feeling crummy and you have to take that medicine that you don't like taking, right? We still have to take the medicine because that's going to help us get better sooner, right? And you remember that last time when XYZ happened and you took the medicine and you were good in 3 days? Well, if we didn't take the medicine, it could have taken a week for you to have gotten better. And because you got better sooner, now you're able to go play with your friends and we do our play dates but you have to take the medicine. So I think that for a kid, depending on where they are, like younger kids, I think that's the best way to orient it around play and about things that they enjoy. So because we're doing this, like the economy and all these things are going on, because we're doing these things, it means that we can't have a whole lot right now. Those times when I tell you when we go to the store that I can't get it today, but I will be able to get it at the end of the week, right? And we do get it at the end of the week. It's because I have to make decisions today to ensure that we have the capacity to enjoy tomorrow. So what happens here is that we're framing this conversation around what could possibly be good outcomes, as opposed to financially socializing our children to fear the economy, to fear the world, to fear the markets. And that's exactly what we do, because financial socialization happens two ways. It happens directly or indirectly. My biggest fear always is indirect financial socialization, is that when kids are around grown folk talk and people are just kind of just saying stuff, that doesn't necessarily have merit. It just sounds good because of how they feel about it. But never once do we stop and say, oh, so-and-so is listening. Let me go check with them to see what they heard. And more importantly, how they internalized it. And we don't understand this, but oftentimes the very fear and anxiety that we experience about the markets, about the world around us, are because of these indirect socialization events that we internalized, not appropriately. Now we're fearful, and it's founded because my uncle said that. My grandmother said that. These are people that I love. I don't know any better not to know what is or what isn't the truth, or that they have limited understanding of markets and the economy and supply and demand factors. They don't know that. They just take that as the truth. And then they start to build their narratives around this stuff. What we're experiencing now has always been and always will be. There's always going to be volatility in the markets. There's always going to be volatility in our households. There's always going to be things happening in corporate America, both domestically and internationally. It's a natural part of the process, right? So if we understand that, then what I try to do with my boys, I try to say, hey, well, where's the opportunity, right? We're talking about obstacles, but where's the opportunity? So right now, both my boys, we sit down and we talk about investment type things and all that jazz. And I say, hey, well, if the markets are down, what do you think? What industries do you think might be strong industries into the future? And why? Because if the markets are down right now, there might be an excellent opportunity to buy some stuff up that have very great prospects to the future and in a diversified way. So we use this to talk about diversification. Well, why we diversify? Because if we put all of our eggs in one basket and that one company is now gone, that means everything we have is gone. So where's the opportunity? How do we navigate this? Through diversification. And so what does that look like? So we don't put all of our eggs in this basket. We can put one in this basket over here, in this basket over here, and in this basket over here. And then if one stumbles, another one might be doing really, really well. So it balances everything out. So none of this conversation is fear-based and fear propaganda, which they're going to have to navigate that on their own for the rest of their lives with every social media outlet that they run into. And the home is one of the best opportunities to actually present narratives that don't revolve around fear, but actually revolve around opportunities. And if we talk about opportunities, we're actually teaching them to be entrepreneurial in nature indirectly. You're planting those seeds. Something comes up. Where's the opportunity? Isn't that what an entrepreneur does? So we want to talk about entrepreneurship, but we don't actually equip our children and people in our communities in the midst of obstacles to potentially see opportunities and then to consider how we monetize, right? So everything within this, because I'm going to be honest with you, once we get to the back end of this, there are going to be people who buy into the fear, right? And then what are we going to see? Renata, you know this is going to come up. We're going to see a report that says, due to the economic downturn, the have-nots got poor, and then the rich among us ultimately made gazillions of dollars because the vast majority of their wealth is tied to the stock markets, right? And not necessarily in home ownership and things of that nature. And so we've heard that narrative over and over again. It doesn't change. It's the same narrative. And it happens during the same time periods every time. 2008, 2009, 2001, 2002. Early 1980s, now during the pandemic, right? Yeah, people are going to be jumping out of the markets and then selling low and then coming back and buying high. The story never changes. It's the same story. A Random Walk Down Wall Street is a great book. It goes all the way back to the 1500s and it tells the same story over and over again. Human behavior is very, very consistent, regardless of all the technology and things that we have. The issue there is, can I trust doing something contrary to what all of the social media outlets are saying, all of what my family is saying, because it's all going to be fear laden in that particular instance. And I tell my boys all the time, there is no secret sauce here. It's just understanding a game plan and sticking to it. And if you can do that and have a little bit of patience and create a little bit of a foundation so that if financial shock does happen along the way, You're not forced to have to pull out of your equity position, just like the banks now, and you've lost value in equity, right? Because you're generally going to be selling low, not high. To be able to cover something in the short term, we want to make sure that we have the purpose of an emergency fund, or what I call a get to fund, because I don't like the negative connotation of emergency fund. So instead, I like to call it a get to fund. I have this money because I still get to do all the things that I want to do if something comes up. I think that's a better reframe, and it doesn't cause fear and anxiety, which is why we continue to struggle with the same things, because we don't even realize that we're actually socializing the very thing that we're trying to now address in a back end. And so I tend to try to think about things from an opportunity, not mitigating the obstacle, but understanding, yes, the obstacle is a very real thing.
Right. And the opportunities.
But the opportunity is very real too. And let's kind of tap into that, because that's where the money's at. That's where the money resides.
Exactly. And I also heard you talk about basically your money story, which goes back to our childhood, which does shape our understanding, our emotional feelings towards money, which brings me into my next topic of, you have a book that's coming out in a couple of days. And you
actually, Renarda, so this was the thing. I went ahead and released it early. So it actually is available now to order for anybody who's interested in ordering it. It's on Amazon.com, and the book is Black Financial Culture, Building Wealth from the Inside Out. And there's a link to the website just to learn more about it in the event that this may be something that's of interest to you.
So I've had the privilege of reading the book, and it was well written. It definitely felt like it was more of a conversation. It was easy to follow with relatable stories that really captured me. And I also love the fact that it wasn't a tickle your ears, get rich scheme book. It was definitely a book that was meant to give you self-reflection. You really have to be involved with it. So let's jump right into this. Tell me why the title. Where did you get that? What's the meaning behind the title?
So a while ago, well, there's a good buddy of mine. I was working on a research project, and we were talking about financial socialization. And one of the things I've always been interested in is, as parents, do we financial socialize our boys differently than we financially socialize our daughters? And so I had an opportunity to work with students and their parents or caregivers, and we're able to collect some data. And what we found is that, generally speaking, across the board, parents had agreed that they have different conversations with their sons than they do with their daughters about money, right? So that's that, again, this whole idea of, in order to address it, we have to recognize that it's a thing. Because otherwise we just keep recreating the wheel and not understanding that we are actually too a part of that system that's causing for the issue to happen or arise. And so I was talking to my buddy who was a part of the study, and he was saying, we need to have more conversations about financial literacy because white folks have like all the information about this or that or the other. And I'm sitting here thinking, I was like, if white folks had all the information, there is no way that Dave Ramsey becomes a multimillionaire. That's predominantly his base, quite honestly. White evangelicals. There is no way that if this were just uniquely a Black issue, that Dave Ramsey builds an empire off of teaching people how to budget and pay off debt. It's not possible, right? Because then so the whole point here was, well, if that's the case, where is that coming from for him? I know where that comes from for me. And I talk about some of those elements in the book. So what I'm trying to do is to kind of challenge our notions and perceptions about Black financial culture, generally from my unique lens of navigating Gary, Indiana, predominantly Black city, different things that we would consider to be Black financial culture. And then what are the implications along the way from a very unique perspective that revolves around my internalization of my experiences. That's unique to me in my vantage point, but it's universal in that we all internalize our own experiences. So I think that there are going to be some commonalities when somebody reads something like this
Mhm.
to challenge even the way that they internalized it. And there's a line that I use in a book that says, at some point we have to question whether or not what we know aligns with where we're trying to go, right? Because we may be limited based on the information that we currently have, and we want to achieve all these amazing things, but we're using the wrong tools to get there.
Mhm.
And just like earlier when I had mentioned about with the financial socialization and having a conversation and grown folks are talking in a way that your child internalizes, well, that's an internal tool that they're going to
Mhm.
use to protect themselves from the scary market and factors. So the financially optimal strategy for them is going to completely avoid the markets. But if their goal is to create wealth, you have to own things.
Yeah,
But if
you
you're
do.
socialized to think that owning things is scary and you can lose a lot of money and you shouldn't do it, now we have dissonance. How do I deal with that, right?
Mhm.
So that was the whole purpose of this in terms of Black financial culture. Not telling people what to do,
Mhm.
not being paternalistic at all. My
Mm.
whole stance is that I trust Black people. I trust the financial savvy, the know-how, the smarts, the skill sets of all Black households. And I think that it goes understated how financially savvy we've been, both
Mhm.
now and historically, to make ends meet and just to be in the position that we are today.
Mhm.
But what I don't want us to do is to think about Black financial culture necessarily as something that's fixed, right? It's actually something that we can make decisions within a context of our own household, our families, and our churches, and our communities and extended communities to say, how might we want to experience Black financial culture different from how we've known it?
Mhm.
And you have the choice to do that if you choose to do it. And in doing it, you're not embracing white culture.
Right.
And that's so incredibly important.
Mhm.
Like financial sophistication, savvy, things of that nature, like that's not new to the Black experience. We're not the first to be something of something. We've always been and come from something, right? And so what frustrates me is when we allow for ourselves to always play from behind, when we have everything and tool within us to actually play with the sensibility that we should be winning.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that for me is so incredibly important. So that's the paradigm there with Black financial culture. And then on the book, and actually I'll pull it down off my shelf really quickly. Um, there is this heart that is actually in the middle here, right? And so
Mhm.
this comes from Japanese culture, and there's something called Kinsugi.
Mhm.
So what happens in Japan is that when you have broken pottery, you actually piece it back together with this gold lacquer that they use. And the idea is that once it's been reformed, it's actually considered to be more beautiful than it was in its original state.
Mm.
So it's that whole notion of healing and
Yeah.
knowing that through the healing process, it's not something to be ashamed of, but we're
Mhm.
actually being refined and not defined by our experiences and actually becoming the better version of ourselves. And that
Mhm.
should ultimately, if I were to say one thing, should be what Black financial culture is. We're not defined by past mistakes. We're not
Right.
necessarily defined by historical things that have happened, even though they play a very real role in what's
Mhm.
transpiring today. We always say, man, if 400 years ago we would have had X, Y, and Z. My
Mhm.
question is, well, what are we doing now so that 400 years from now, our
We're not saying
children
the
or
same
great great grandchildren, greats can say that we took full advantage of now so that we
thing.
could plant trees that we'll never eat fruit from, but they
Mhm.
will. So we
Mhm.
actually have a choice to make, and we can do it with small steps. Doesn't have to be extraordinary things, especially if we use a paradigm that's not based on individualistic pursuits, even
Mhm.
though individualism is important, but also thinking about what is our community impact. And
Right.
that takes trust. We
Mhm.
talk about group dynamics oftentimes in the Black community, especially in terms of buy Black and things of that nature.
Mhm.
Well, it's incredibly difficult to engage in group economics if there isn't group trust.
Right.
So within this book, I talk a lot about forgiveness and healing within a context of these things. Because even if one person, like in the Black community, we always have like the one rich uncle or the one rich aunt, they got all the money. But what happens psychologically is for many of us, we think that, oh, only one of us was supposed to make it.
Right.
Right. And that was never the case whatsoever for that to ever be. So it's kind of encouraging people to think about, all right, what can I do? Like my rich uncle or aunt created some wealth. How can I add to what this looks like as a collective? Right. Even though it's a little, but when we start thinking about our works and efforts together, it's fairly significant. Right. And anytime you hear research about the Black community, it's not what the individual is doing, is what the entire Black community has spent.
Right. The whole
Right.
group.
Right. Like Black Americans spend $3 trillion a year on X, Y, and Z. We don't look at it on an individual level. We look at the holistic. So why can't we do that with wealth? When we think about wealth, we think about it very individualistically. Why can't we start considering, all right, well, I know that my wealth position is only $50,000. That's fine. And if you're the first person in your family that's ever created wealth, that's a huge win. You're winning. Right. And then if we said, hey, well, there's 10 or 20 or 30 of us, and then all of us have a wealth position individually of $50,000, but now we start to think about our family impact on wealth, then that number feels a lot different. Right. And it makes you want to be invested in contributing to this thing to build wealth. Because what happens when we build wealth?
It becomes bigger than
we can create, like you can loan money to family members who may be trying to create a business, not blindly. They would need to create a business plan and go through the process, because family wealth creation is important. And we want you to take this seriously. And we want to invest in an enterprise that has a great chance of advancing wealth, not only wealth, but also job opportunities for people within a family. And if we want to scale, like we can have multiple family members running multiple shops, like we have to do this together, right? But it has to, but trust, healing, dealing with trauma, I talk about these things in the book, are so incredibly important, because if we don't, what happens is that one person does it, then one person comes, they go, they die. The money's distributed. There is no family culture around money, family understand, and then that money's gone. And then somebody else becomes the next rich uncle. But this is the thing, it's not just unique to Black culture. In white culture, within 3 generations, any type of inheritance is completely gone, and a significant portion based on the first generation that's passed along to. So my whole point is talking on both sides of the conversation. We can't just talk about creating wealth. We have to talk about sustaining wealth as well. So I know I use sustainability with wealth quite a bit. I didn't go into like home ownership and things of that nature here, because there's so much I need to touch on with home ownership sustainability. Did you all know that African Americans, generally speaking, when they purchase their first home, they typically do so 5 years, roughly 5 to 7 years later than their white counterparts? Not only do they do so 5 to 7 years later than their white counterparts, they're usually paying higher interest rates on the homes. Generally speaking, in the research that I've done and other research that we've seen, is that to be paying the amount that we're paying on homes that don't appreciate in the same value as their white counterparts. And not only that, African Americans are more likely to have to sell their home and go back to renting than any other national. So we can talk about home ownership all day, but if we don't talk about this complete system and why these barriers persist, and that continues to be the case, it actually could be a situation where we're actually diluting wealth. And we're putting people in a bad situation. So this book, I wanted to keep it 100 pages or less. I could have written a novel or an article. Honestly.
I know. To be quite honest, I wanted more.
Yeah,
I wanted more. It was
That's
really
good.
Yeah, it was really good. There's a couple of things that I want to kind of point out and get your take on it.
Yeah.
You had a term in there, prosocial shame. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So if you look at any of the research around shame, there's actually an element of something called prosocial shame, and what that it generally comes from social capital theory, and what that is basically is that within community, you have these dynamics that everybody should play by the rules, right? Everybody understands what these rules are, whether they're explicit meaning that we've communicated those directly or they're implicit. Everybody just knows, like, you don't do that, right? So in any event, when someone violates those rules and social constructs within the community, right, generally speaking, there are sanctions that are imposed. And with these sanctions, the idea is that we shame people, prosocial shaming, which is to kind of tell people that you've done something wrong, you've done something bad. The issue, though, there is that when we engage in pro-social shaming, we have to understand what shame means. Oftentimes, when people engage in that, they do so because they've been hurt by someone that's hurt them, and they're trying to hurt them back.
Like hurt people.
Hurt people. So this idea of pro-social shame is, yes, you did something wrong. I'm going to rub your nose in it. I'm going to make sure that you know that you did this, and I'm not going to live it down or whatever it may be. Unfortunately, what happens if that person is dealing with shame already, which isn't that I made a mistake. That's guilt. Guilt is I made a mistake, right? All right, I see it. I did it. I can still use my prefrontal cortex and move forward. If you exist in a community that sees it as a mistake and it's not who you are. And that's the dangerous element of prosocial shame, is that oftentimes we engage in it because we're well-intentioned by it, because we think that we're helping someone. But are we helping someone or are we labeling someone? These are two different things. And if somebody already is struggling with, I am a mistake, I can't get things right, and then prosocial shame keeps happening, well, they never actually develop their prefrontal cortex to actually think through and view this as more as guilt and not shame. And then now if I'm shamed by it, well, I guess if I'm a bad person, I'm gonna act like a bad person, right? I guess it's called commitment consistency. That's in psychology. How we're labeled, how we're defined. And if we start to accept those labels and definitions, hence Black financial culture, what labels are we accepting? Then we typically commit to the labels and we behave consistently. And what happens is that that can become family patterns, and it can become family culture that then after a while, a few generations later, nobody really understands where any of this came from, right? So there's some danger in prosocial shaming, if not really done in a way to where we're not really trying to shame people. We're trying to actually speak to this external thing that they did, right, without tethering them to the external thing in such a way where we can't differentiate the identity between the thing and the person. That's now we have a label. And that's why I mentioned prosocial shame, and it can become a slippery slope. And so compassion generally, and I end the book with compassion, isn't that we don't have the tough conversations. It's just that you can have tough conversations, but you can do it with thoughtfulness. You can do it with kindness. You can do it and still have boundaries, right? But you're giving an opportunity, but you're extending that person opportunity to grow. If they choose to grow at that time or if they don't. And I'll be honest with you, there have been times in my life where people have extended me opportunities to grow. I didn't have the capacity. I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the self-awareness. None of it, quite honestly. So I've even been there, right? But over time, we all have. And that's the beauty of empathy, is because we recognize that we all have. And so with the book, on the very back end, I end with this compassionate theme, because I call it the saved effect. And that's probably somebody else has probably said that as well, but I've always called it that. Like when you're saved and sanctified, or like you're finally out of debt and you're making money, you want everybody to come with you. And if they don't come with you, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want to receive the Lord as your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ? And they don't want to hear that. They're not there. And the truth is that you were there at one point in time where you didn't want to hear it either. So if there was hope for you to change behavior and you didn't want to hear it, why would we then cast that same energy on those other people in our circles, knowing that we didn't have the capacity to hear it? So what compassion does, it helps to recognize that in this particular context, that a wrong has been done. We have to address the wrong. However, but it's rooted in grace and not contempt. And there's a and everybody got the aunts, everybody got the uncles, where they kind of got they always have something to say, and it has a little bit of sting on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not prosocial shame in the way that it was intentionally meant to help someone grow through a situation and to become better. When that's happening, we're creating a label, we're defining somebody by that label, and we're actually limiting and stunting their growth because they have to operate within a community.
Mm-hmm.
So now I can't be seen by the community. Now we're wondering why so-and-so isn't coming into the family gatherings. Why so-and-so isn't, right? Because we've shamed them.
Mm-hmm.
And shame that's who I am,
Right.
not that I've made a mistake. And we have to understand the difference.
That's so good. Oh gosh, I can talk to you for hours. I have another quick question. You talk so much about your mom, quite a bit. How has she financially impacted you?
Yeah. So honestly, if it weren't for my mom, I wouldn't be the person that I am with money today. Because, and my mom would tell you this if she were here, she made a lot of financial mistakes as we were growing up. My mom liked to gamble. She liked to go to the boat. Whenever she had a few dollars, she was at the boat. If she won some money, we'd have $50 on our bedroom in the morning. If she didn't win money, we wouldn't hear anything about it. And it was very rarely that we had $50 or $100 sitting up on our nightstand or whatever it may be. But I internalized my mom's struggle in a way where I didn't want to repeat the same patterns and behaviors that she had adopted. And when I was younger, again, I didn't have the capacity to understand the context of her struggles and what she was dealing with. And so, but that meant that we couldn't go on a trip that we were supposed to go on. And then living in a space to where, I had family members who were, alcoholics, were drug abusers, and things of that nature. It wasn't uncommon for, money to go missing and, being robbed and all these other different things. That was just kind of par for the course, right? In terms of where we navigate it. So there was a lot of volatility around our community dynamic and our system as it relates to money, so on and so forth. And I just personally, I didn't want to live in somebody's attic getting older. I didn't want to live in somebody's basement. I didn't want to ever have to sleep below, by a stove to get heat because we don't have any heat, right? Or boil water so you can take a bath. Like that's reality. And so I internalized those things in terms of I don't want those things, but in a way that was hyper vigilant, which meant that I was saving a lot and I was afraid to live life because I was afraid that something's going to happen on the backside and I'm not going to have the money and I'm in a position. So in the book, I wrestle with that narrative and those struggles of adopting a savings behavior that from the outside looks like, oh, this person is saving, they're doing good, but it was all fear-based.
Right.
And I didn't have balance. And it wasn't until I married my wife where I've been able to create that balance because she's nudged me in such a way to say, hey, let's go on a trip, let's do this, and everything's going to be okay when we get back. Right.
And you have to
I needed those moments. And that's helped me out considerably. And to know that I'm not bounded by the same circumstances that we were at that time. And it's hard for your inner child actually to see the world any differently than what we knew it to be at some point. And that's something that I wrestled with. It's something that I still wrestle with. I still have to force myself to spend money and engage and go and have fun and live life a little bit. And I always enjoy my time when I do those things. It's just that there's still a little bit of that angst that's in there. That's like the shoe is going to drop somewhere. It's always something, right? But what I've learned is that that's life. That's the volatility of life. My experiences, and I share some very vulnerable ones in the book, aren't just unique to me. That when you actually engage in community, you realize we're all living life. We're all battling things. We're all X, Y, and Z. You're going to have some good times. You're going to have your down times. But in the meantime, you can do everything within your power to see the opportunity in things instead of focusing on the obstacle of the thing.
Man, it was a great read. But tell us, what is it that you want the readers to actually take away from the book? Like, what if you could like put that in a quick synopsis for us? What would that look like for them?
Yeah, the quick synopsis is Black financial culture is not what's been defined for you. It has to be defined by you and uniquely you. That's that is the freedom that we have right now that previous generations didn't have. Is that we are in a position where we have greater access to resources and money and things. We have access to investments. If you go back to the early 1900s, Black people couldn't invest, right? Or if we look at banking and a banking system, even women couldn't have banking accounts at a certain point in time.
Mm-hmm.
This is all very real and not too far or in the far past.
Mm-hmm.
So we're now in a position where we have the tools, we have more resources than we've ever had before. And it's really time that we sit down and reevaluate, what do we want Black financial culture to be for ourselves as an individual, for my family, for my community, and then just walk in that truth and be empowered by it and know that you're supposed to be here. You're supposed to be doing these things if you choose to do these things, but it's your choice. That's freedom. And I want people to be free in terms of considering, am I actually making choices because I've actually thought through these? And this is what I desire for myself? Or am I just falling in line with some construct that as I'm looking around, it's been limiting, right? And we're not getting any further than we've always been. Do I have to continue to be bound by those constraints? And in many instances, you don't have to. And then the beauty is that if you commit to something and you stick with it, then you become the very thing that other people in your family need to see, because they're bounded by never knowing or not seeing something transact or happen in a way sustainably to see the growth. And I say this in a book that someone has to be all in for everyone to be all in. Why not you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Thomas, I could talk to you for hours. The book, I'm telling you, is a great book. I'm glad that you took the time to put it together, and I'm sure it's definitely a book that each family should have and share it with their kids. It's definitely easy to follow and very relatable. And congratulations on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I hope that you come back. You know, you're always welcome here, and we appreciate all of the insight that you share with us.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you for bringing me on. And definitely Amazon.com, Black Financial Culture. This book was designed to be read in community and not in isolation. Once you read it, you'll see why. So if you get it, I would encourage you to at least get 2 copies and read it with someone in your family or alongside with them. Even people who are the old heads in the family, right? The matriarchs, the patriarchs, or even your younger children who are just graduating. This conversation is full circle, and it gets everyone thinking about what I need to be doing to add value to our family system as we define what we want Black financial culture to be to us.
Well, again, thank you so much. You guys, he wants you to go to blackfinancialculture.com where you can get more information about the book, as well as you can purchase the book there as well.
Yeah, so when you go there, there's a link that'll take you to the Amazon page. So all that information, you can get either blackfinancialculture.com or you can go directly to Amazon to pick it up.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again. You guys have a great night. And again, please go check out his book.
Thank you.
Bye.